Bonsoir. So, as mentioned, I'm going to talk about doing UX when you haven't really got an awful lot of data. So, I'll start by introducing where I'm working. So, A Little Market and A Little Mercery are a French product born and bred in Paris, which started in 2008 and was acquired by Etsy in 2014. So, A Little Market's whole product team, all the user experience, that's all based in Paris. And we're in this unique and quite special position of having a big brother that's kind of done everything that we would do before. So have this kind of special position, which is almost the opposite of what I'm just going to describe, which is where you're medium-sized but have huge amounts of data to work with. But it's separately branded, so if you go to a Little Market, you'd have to look at the legals to know it's Etsy, but everything behind the scenes all comes from Etsy. A little bit about me. So I'm the UX lead at Etsy. I've had the benefit in my time of working for big companies, startups that I've started, startups that other people have started, and consultancy. So been able to see a range all across and hopefully pull together a bit of that knowledge for you tonight. So a quick rundown. Previous to joining here in Paris 3 months ago, I was entrepreneur in residence at Jaguar Land Rover, and I'm going to talk about some of those experiences tonight. I co-founded an app called Great Little Place, which is kind of everybody's second startup idea of wouldn't it be great if you could find all the quirky, charming places wherever you go. Had some great success with that, got Apple's best new app and 1 million fans around the world, and learnt a lot in the process. Taught product management at General Assembly, which is does the kind of similar to the education part here. And then led product at a couple of startups before that. And my prior life was in ad agencies, so some of London's better-known ad agencies, Wieden & Kennedy, Anomaly, and a few others. So let's get started. Why does UX need data? So user experience design's task is to ensure that users can do what they want to do. When I talk here, my aim is to make stuff as obvious as possible. If it sounds too clever, then I'm getting it wrong. It should be as obvious as possible and also as actionable as possible, because I think quite often talks can be a bit too nebulous, a bit too theoretical, but I like to try and put as many real actions that I've done to it. So hopefully you'll see a few of those. So user experience design's task is to ensure users can do what they want to do. So to do that, you need to know what your users want and if your solutions are working. Sounds quite basic, it is, but what do the people that are using your product desire? And then does what you're doing work? And it should be clear and it should be easy and confident for people to navigate. So what we're looking for is facts of real truths. And my first tip is a way to think about what you're finding out. So you will all have had lots of debates internally about, oh, I think it's more this, these people are going to want that, these users want different things. And there's a sort of a heuristic way of thinking, which is that the majority of people will want one solution. So to give you a tangible example, on Great Little Place, the app, I wanted the predominant colour to be yellow. My co-founder wanted it to be green. We could have talked all night, all day about it and never resolved that. So what we ran, we drove people from our Facebook page, which was fortunately quite large, to a SurveyMonkey and just asked people to respond. And what's interesting is what you saw in 10 minutes is exactly the same as we saw in 3-4 days. So it was kind of a 75% preferred green, bastards. And so that's what we went with. But you'll find following the traces of data happens very, very quickly, whatever form you put it in. So really when most people think about data, they're thinking about quantitative data. So A/B testing, running two things and seeing what really works. Data really is more than that. It's qualitative as well. But when you've got lots of data, you find out interesting things. So this example, anyone know what that chart refers to? I heard it. There is Airbnb. So they knew when they had professional photos of the apartments that could be rented, those were the ones that rented much, much better. And that point of inflection is what saw Airbnb go through massive growth. And the only way that they could know that is because they had enough people going through the site that they could see tangible differences. One of the more famous and more ridiculous tests is Google testing 41 shades of blue for what's the optimum color to have people convert on the search. But these guys can do that because they're massive and they've got lots of data. And if you guys are working in startups who are quite small, it's quite possible that you don't. So that's the real heart of what this talk is about, which is how can you get meaningful information when you've got very little data. Real chart from real startup that I've worked on. So these shouldn't be unfamiliar. I'm not necessarily teaching anything here, but three main big stages to building something. Know your customer, focus on their problems. Test your ideas so that the concepts, the wireframes, the early mock-ups you put together are hitting the right notes as quickly and cheaply as you can. And then test the real product. So when you're out in market, do people like what you've done? So what we're doing here is reducing risk. How can you not spend lots of time on things that don't matter? Well, I'll talk a bit more about reducing risk when I talk about experiment culture a little bit later. So what I'm going to do is give some 3 actionable tips, things that I've really done in each of those stages, which might be beneficial to you. And of those things, I would argue that the only thing you can't really do in the early stages of a startup is get significant quantitative data. But there are ways around that. So my big tips are on 2 areas. So how do you find out info across each of those 3 areas? So I'll give you 3 tips for each. And the concept of building an experiment culture, so executing your business as a series of experiments. And when I introduce here the last product I worked on before Etsy, and it was amazing, I was a very lucky experience to work through, but as I say, I was entrepreneur in residence for Jaguar Land Rover, and car sales are the best they've ever been, but the apocalypse is coming. So electric cars are here, self-driving cars around the corner, Uber and Lyft on the rise. So car manufacturers are very, very worried, and you'll see them talking a lot about mobility. And Jaguar Land Rover was no different. So they set us an area quite broad of how can we improve car ownership. So I'm going to use that as a tangible example of some of the things I talk about. So the first thing, know your customer. That was the first stage I mentioned. So where we're trying to get to is who is your customer and what is their problem. And very often, all the startups you're working on will quite probably have multiple customers. So a way that took me much longer than it should have done to understand is you're not necessarily thinking about all of those different customers, particularly in the early stages. Who's your most likely first customer? So that's what Peter Thiel was talking about when he's saying 0 to 1. How do you get a single first customer? So think about who's the person that's most likely to be that. So here are some techniques to do it when you haven't really got an awful lot of data. So the first thing that says use Facebook Audience Insights tool. So there's this amazing thing. Facebook, being the omnipotent giants that they are, have an outrageous amount of data about you. And if you have an advertising account, there's something called the Advertising Insights tool. And across the area that you're interested in, that will give you quite a lot of useful charts. So an example would be with CarFlex, which is the Jaguar Land Rover car ownership proposition. I could select people that are likely to buy a car in the next year, and then it'll show me some other charts. So it shows me how old they are likely to be, how much university education they're likely to have. So that's a good way to get a first take of who your audience might be. Second thing is run Facebook ads that progressively focus. So what I mean by that is car ownership. Take CarFlex again as an example. Massive bracket. Anyone from 18 to 80 could drive a car. Who are you focusing on there? It's men and it's women. So what we did in that instance was run the same ad to men over 45 and women over 45, men under 45 and women under 45, but over 18, and see when an equal spend, equal amount of advertising goes to those different audiences, as broad as it gets, who's the more likely to follow through? Which is the audience set which has clicked that? So we got a take which matched what we saw in the Audience Insights tool, that it's men, primarily just over 45, that was the most likely to click. So we were following in that trail of who it's likely to be. If you have a site, drive people to that site. We didn't when we were starting off with Carflex, so we just had a landing page which says, we're changing car ownership, do you want to know more? But what was important in that instance was how many people are clicking the ads. So even if you haven't got any product at all, consider making a landing page which you're just driving people to see who does that. Another good thing about using Facebook ads is it can settle debates about what's the best image and what's the best messaging. So if you do that in a systematic way, same image, different titles, the ones that get clicked the most are going to be the ones that are most popular. Same with images. So if you put select one of up to 5 multiple images, the one that gets clicked the most, that's likely your best image. And it goes back to that point about there's a truth there, which is one of those things is going to be most attractive to most of your people. So think that way. So the last one is look at competitors and look for hints from what they do. So what photography do they use? Because it's likely to reflect the kind of audience that they've got. When they are doing press, who do they talk about as being their target customer, and try and gain from them what they say their customer is and what they say the problem is. And the best thing about UX is it's kind of the opposite of university, because good practice in UX is copying people. And look at your big competitors, and they employ armies of data scientists and designers and usability studies, and there's a reason why they are like they are. So don't try and reinvent the wheel necessarily, focus on whatever your core proposition is. And if someone's doing things that are similar, take what they've learned for yourself. So there's 2 important actions about this. So one is, are users self-solving? So you are saying that there's a customer with a problem. If you've found any of those customers, and for the Carflex example, where we got people to come through to the landing page, we've got their phone numbers, and then we phoned them up, and we use that as our first bit of customer development. So are they already solving this problem? So in the car ownership example, that's quite clear. They are getting leases, or they're buying cars, but they have a problem with it. So if you speak to people and you think that you've got a startup opportunity, and you find the kind of person that would use it, and they're not currently solving that problem themselves, they're just going, oh, I can't really be bothered, you probably haven't got a business idea. So that's the key, are people self-solving? And then the second thing is create a persona. So we've kind of narrowed in on the demographic using the different tools, so what sort of age they are. Ring those people up, get in touch with them, and try and find out what that problem is, and then draw that up as a persona, which is an imaginary person that does the things that you want them to do. And there's plenty of templates for that. Okay, so the second thing, test your ideas. You've identified who your customer is and what their problem is. Hopefully, that's easier said than done. And you've got ideas how to solve that problem, but how do you do it when you haven't got much data? So first thing, the best thing you can ever do in any of your startups, and you will have heard this multiple times, but is speak to your target customers. So from the previous stage, we found out roughly who they are, what their problems are. Now, we've probably got some wireframes, or we've got some basic concepts of a site. We haven't gone to the stage of developing anything necessarily. Get in front of your target audience. And the best way to do this is depth interviews, so that you're taking people through a flow and seeing what they do and don't understand. There's plenty of resources on this, but this is called customer development. The best book to read on it is called The Mum Test by a guy called Rob Fitzpatrick. And get people that don't know you, because people that do try and say what you want them to hear, which is what that book's largely about. That will give you the richest information out of all of this. Also, it can be quite hard getting people, so use yours or other people's social networks. Reward people, so €50 Amazon vouchers or things like that can help. And if you have to, use a recruitment company to get participants, which is costly but is money worth spending. Second tip is fake A/B tests with Google customer surveys. So if you haven't got lots of traffic, you can't see what works out of X and Y. Google customer surveys are an excellent tool to put 2 different ideas in front of somebody and ask them to choose. And the way it works is you can pick your demographic, you can pick the location, and you'll get a report back the next day which said which one of those things worked best. As a way of faking A/B tests when you haven't got lots of users. Third thing is, again, cheat, run user tests on your competitors' sites. So there's a brilliant tool from usertesting.com called Peak, and you get a 5-minute free user test on any site you want. And I talked about CarFlex, I'll talk more about it, but it was an idea around new car ownership. We found something similar in America and ran some user tests on their site to see what people thought when they came across it. And it's hugely insightful because you find ways of what people might find wrong with your real product. So that's another good thing to do. One other thing I mentioned there is using Google AdWords to hone your messaging. So probably the best known case study in that case is Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek book. He had a load of names, bought ads against them all for certain keywords, and saw what got click-throughs and what didn't, and that's how he came up with, or decided on the 4-Hour Workweek name. So you can use Google AdWords as a hack for what's the best messaging. So with CarFlex, we did that. We spoke to a lot of people. We found out what our problem was. So our customer was what we call a tech dad. So it's a guy who's about 45 to 55, had a young kid or two, lived either on the outskirts of a city or in a town, and had technologies likely to use things like Amazon Fire. And his problem was that car ownership is a bind. It's too much of a commitment, and liked the idea of being able to change it. So at that stage, we were pretty clear on who we were after. So test your real product. You've built an MVP of your idea. You want to know what's working and what's not about it. But how do you do that? Again, with no data. So use user testing to test your real site. So one of the things that you would be doing if you did have a real product and you had lots of users is you would be conducting real-life user tests with those people. An easy way to get those users, so you can select by demographic, is using usertesting.com. Works for apps as well. You can just upload the app file, and within hours you'll get back someone narrating their process of going through your app, and it's incredibly insightful. So that's a killer one to do. Second thing, that says remove things until it damages your OMTM, and what that means is one metric that matters. So if you've ever read a book called Lean Analytics, that talks about the idea of one metric that matters. If you haven't read that book, I suggest you do. And at any one time in your business stage, there's probably one thing that you ought to be pushing to be able to get to the next stage. If you take things away and it doesn't affect what really matters at that stage, then that's a good thing. So having less stuff on your site or app that's driving your main metric is a benefit. And the last one is artificially boost traffic and look at click data. So it's very easy to get into a hole, which I absolutely have done, of when this thing's massive, it will be great. You know, everyone will know, and they'll all use these different things. And you imagine what it would be like to be a well-trafficked site or have lots of social media followers. Boost it for a day. So get lots of your target users on by using Facebook ads and Google ads, and spend a little bit of money in a day, and then look at the click data of where people go. So heat maps are done quite easily with Crazy Egg, for example, and you can look at your Google Analytics to see what people do and don't click. So those are my 3 tips for the 3 bits each. I've got more, and so please fire questions on those. But one thing that I learned when I was, as I say, entrepreneur in residence at JLR is the way we did it was quite fortunate because we didn't have to worry about fundraising and we didn't have to worry about building the team necessarily. They made us relentlessly focus on one thing, which is, are we building a product that customers want? And that was quite a luxury, but it was also quite a learning experience. And it taught me things about things I thought I knew, but I didn't. So everyone will be familiar with this, I imagine, which is lean startup. So the idea of build something, measure whether or not it's been successful, and put those learnings back into the build cycle so that you're not building massive tranches of product that nobody wants. But the mistake and hole to fall in with this, which absolutely I did, is thinking of it as a kind of pure management theory. So you can read Lean Startup, get the concept in half the book, and then away you go. And you know that you need to get data, and you know you need to kind of measure what's happening and then put it back in. But where it works best is when it's a template for how to execute a business. So execute a business as a series of experiments. So I'll explain what I mean by that. So in the early stages of a startup, what you're doing is trying to reduce the risk. So the reason some businesses can go to investors and raise money easily is because all the assumptions that they have at the heart of their startup, so take Carflex for example, we assumed that people wanted actually I'll tell you what the product was because it'll make it easier. It was an all-in-one, switch-off anytime car subscription. So you pay a single amount, you get a car, insurance, roadside recovery, and the ability to stop or change at any time. There's lots of assumptions at the bottom of that, which is that people want to change their car, that we would be able to get cars to people in a suitable amount of time. We had questions about what brands we might use. And so what we were doing was systematically knocking off the most important risks based on experiments. And I come on to talk about that next. So I said there's kind of a truth at the heart of what you're doing, and that's following sense. So when you have a hunch about something but data's proving you otherwise, the chances are that the data's right. There's a majority of people who think a certain way. And you're building bricks. So to go back to the investor example, it's easier to get invested if you're able to knock off every single risk that an investor might throw at you as a question. So they say, what about this? You say, well, we did this, this is what happened. So executing your business as a series of experiments is a really good way to go about it. How do you decide what to do? This is another technique that we learned. It's quite simple. From a guy that worked as a consultant, and anyone that works as a consultant loves a 2x2. And it's this, which is, of all the assumptions you have at your startup, rank them on this scale. So easy to test, hard to test, mission critical, nice to have. So we'll work through Carflex as an example. Some of the assumptions or questions we might have are, will dealers want to get involved? Will car dealers think that you're stepping on their territory? What brands should you have? What sizes of cars should you have? What's the price point people would be prepared to pay? Those sorts of examples. But all that really matters is what you can test quickly and what's mission critical. So rank all of the assumptions that you have. Work out a hypothesis, so what you believe will be the case, and then find some way of proving that one way or another. And then the next slide's about that. And so what mattered to a car subscription service was really only one thing in the first instance, was do people want a car subscription service that they can turn on or off? And what you do when you try and find out things like that is all sorts of new information comes up, which is, what if I've already got insurance? How would I cancel that? Can I move my no claims bonus over? Things like that. So all the different assumptions that underpin your business model and what you're doing, rank them on how quickly you can test them and how important they are to your customer, and then work through those systematically as the way you build your business. So this is the experiment template we used, and it was very useful. So what is the risky assumption or hypothesis we're testing? So take, for example, Carflex again. People want an all-in-one car subscription. What do we need to measure to know whether we've learnt this? So in that instance, it was that a certain proportion of our target audience would actively follow when we advertise to them relevant information. Design an experiment. So we would formally write down, we're going to do this to this many people. Our expected result is this. We had a fail condition. So for example, if we had less than 5% click-through on the ads, that was a fail condition. If we had less than 10% sign-up on the site, that was a fail condition. They can be completely arbitrary and made up, but try and find other data for what other people have done. Then we would run the experiment. So in this case, primarily with Carflex, it was running Facebook ads leading to a landing page, which had relevant messaging. And if no one signs up, the chances are pretty high that your business isn't a goer. In that instance, so we had quite good response. Then write up your data and how you collected it. And this sounds like extra work, but this is why I'm saying execute your business as a series of experiments, because it becomes how you do your work. And then from that, you'll get all kinds of new hypotheses, new learnings, and that becomes the repository, the drive of your business. So these are all the experiments that we've run. And to look at it in a big business case, that's exactly how a company like Etsy works. So Etsy is big enough that they're not going to start changing their core messaging every day or changing their fonts or changing their templates. They're looking at small parts like basket optimization or improving auto-suggest in search. So the way that every one of those product releases happens is there's an experiment template put to it, which is what we expect to happen, what are our success conditions, and what do we know. And so try and behave like a bigger business when you're a really small one. I mentioned a few tools. I'll just run through them. Usertesting.com is great. It costs, but they certainly used to do some free trials. It's worth looking at. Peak is where you get that free 5-minute test. Usability Hub does similar stuff. So you can do, for example, a 5-second test, put your site in front of somebody for 5 seconds, then ask them what they think it was, which is great for testing your value proposition. Facebook Audience and Insights, as I mentioned. Google Customer Surveys. For heat maps, what people click and what people don't. Crazy Egg's very good. Running A/B tests, so where you run 2 versions of copy and see what people go for. Optimizely is really, really good. And there's a couple of sites there for UX checklists as well, which is where you can run through some kind of key heuristics of things you ought to have thought about with your site. And also, the user is drunk, which is a genius man who gets smashed and reviews your website because he thinks that your website should be so obvious, I can use it when I'm drunk. So that's me, and I'm very, very happy to take any questions, and also any worked examples. If you have startups and the things you're trying to find out, having kind of been at the thick end of it quite a bit, there might be some stuff that I've done in the past which would be useful to you guys. But thanks a lot.
Hey. Just one question. Do you do every test before building your first MVP, or you build your MVP here and you start the test?
So the question was, do I do A/B tests before you launch the MVP? Is that right? Or A/B tests purely afterwards? So I would do A/B tests afterwards. Depends again on stage. So a couple of answers to that. In a startup, I would have always historically focused on the qualitative info that you get from asking people, because you wouldn't get anything significant from running A/B tests on your site. But how someone like Etsy does it, for example, is they launch a feature to 1% of the users, and they'll get an idea of whether or not it's going to be a success or a fail, and if it is, then it gets pushed live to the rest of the site. So if you're small, I'd focus on doing qualitative things and speaking to people and watching what they do. And if you're big, don't just turn on a new feature at once. Phase its progression as you go.
Hi, thanks for the talk. It was very interesting. Just by curiosity, I would like to know how many designers you are in your team at Etsy, and how do you organize the project team? Are you in feature team, one feature, one project manager, one designer like in BlaBlaCar, for example, or are you a big group and step by step you take the tickets or the project? Great.
There's 2 answers to that question. So one is kind of how is Etsy in Brooklyn organized, and then one is how is Little Market in Paris organized. So in Etsy in Brooklyn, they have a product design discipline and a product management discipline, user research and engineering. And product designers at Etsy in Brooklyn do the design part of user experience, so wireframes, etc. Research does the user research, speaking to people. And so they're organized across key business groups, so buyer experience, seller experience, internal tools, etc. And when they kind of do a continuous planning thing. So every team is contributing what they think that Etsy should do over the next quarter. And then teams of engineers and designers and product managers get assigned to particular features, but they kind of stay within the vertical of buyer experience, seller experience, those kinds of things. ALM, it's a lot smaller, obviously. So the original question was how many. I think there's probably about 30, 40 designers in Etsy in New York. In Paris, it's 1.5, which is we're just in the process of bringing someone in. So I'm a user experience designer by trade rather than a visual designer. And we work across everything. So it's a lot kind of closer to probably startup world.
In the second part, you talked about test your ideas, and you said run user test on your competitor site. But I did not understand how you do that and what kind of tool you use.
Sure.
Should you just... Yeah.
The question was, how would you run user tests on competitors' sites? So using usertesting.com's tools. So real example is we were looking at an all-in-one car subscription, found one in America called driveclutch.com, and you put in your email as your email, and you put in the site you want tested as their site, and the next day you get a user test of someone testing that site into your email, so they don't know that you've done it. And that's Peak, which is the kind of 5-minute quick tool. To do more thorough user tests, you can do the same thing, which is you can sign up, do a full user test with a script, and put that site in, and you'll get good insight on what they're doing. And there's nothing malevolent about that. It's just a really good way to find out about your positioning. And the other way to do it is obviously not to do it remotely and to just get people in and watch them go through your competitor's site. So it should be good, regular practice to get people across a range. So when we did Great Little Place, we regularly got people using other apps in front of us to see how they would really solve the problem. Because the temptation is to think that you have a rational solution to somebody's problem, and so they'll use your thing. But think about yourselves looking for a place to go. The chances are you'll Google some stuff, you might just text a friend. When you've Googled something, you might open a TripAdvisor tab and a Foursquare tab, not really know where or how you found things, but you do. And that's the real behavior that you need to understand, rather than the kind of idealistic view of someone just using your app.
Hi, thanks for the talk. Did you really use the user is drunk? And could you give us a concrete example of what you learned with it?
Which one, sorry, use?
The user is drunk.
I haven't, no, but I came across
you
it.
haven't. Okay.
So I do some heuristic tests in my spare time. And I was looking at the competitors, just looking up UX heuristic tests, and I came across that guy, and chapeau, he's a genius. But he's got like 400 that he's done, and you pay for his time and his beer, so he's winning.
Okay. So you can do it by yourself?
Exactly.
Okay.
Question: do you user test all the features that you want to ship? And second, does your user testing always happen in the US, or you tend to take like I don't know, European people and Asian people to see if it will work well in all countries?
So again, two answers for that. So what they do in Brooklyn and what we do in Paris. So Etsy in Brooklyn, they have historically been quite bad at doing any qualitative analysis. So they would push things live with an A/B test and see what happened. But they wouldn't do much follow-up kind of face-to-face research. In the last couple of years, they've brought in a research team to do that. And the goal is that user research informs at every stage. So they do test every feature via an A/B test, and they test most things via some qualitative analysis. An example of the international thing is there's a new homepage on Etsy at the moment, and a challenge for Etsy as a company is where it started off as very kind of bohemian and scrappy and small in America. That's sort of the perception of it. When it comes to a new market, it's seen as a big American tech company, when in reality it's trying to share what local markets do and help you buy handmade products by people nearby. So a challenge for them is to translate messaging that's created in New York to the rest of the world. And in cases that works, and in cases that doesn't. But certainly what they are trying to do is blend in international research into the process a lot more. The consequence of that is that it makes you go a bit slower. And for us in LM, when we're creating new functionality, we do all we can to test at each stage. So working on a redesign of search at the moment, and did fairly extensive user tests with people to find out what was wrong with the current site. And then we will test what we build. There's always a trade-off, as you guys will know when you're in a startup. There's an emotional thing of where you've spent a long time making something, and the idea to then go and test that with people and have it broken is tough, but necessary. The other thing that's quite hard to do is test mock-ups in a real-life situation. So if you're testing search, you really need real search results to get a result off people. So in that instance, as soon as you feel it's kind of ready to be, it's functionally ready, then try and get people to look at it as best as you can. Merci.
Thanks a lot.
Que l'enfant